everybody. Welcome to an exciting webinar on ensuring accessible websites presented by Ben Soto and Harris Rosensweig. Oh my, I should have asked you how you pronounce your last name.
Rosensweig, it's fine.
Rosensweig, thank you. Harris and TCSA, our associate members of Vision Serve Alliance, have been extremely helpful and generous in their time helping us with our accessibility issues at Vision Serve Alliance, have served on our accessibility committee to assure that all our conference apps are accessible. And let me tell you, that's been a tall order over the years. So we really appreciate, Harris, you and your team's availability and the assistance you've given us over the years. This is a hot topic. As you can see, there's a lot of people on this call. We're expecting 78 people to attend, and we are recording the session. So just let you know that we're going to start with self-introductions, and we're asking you to mute during the presentation, and there will be time reserved at the end for you to ask your questions. So make notes of what you're interested in, and we can ask those questions later. So Harris and Ben, please introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Lee. So I am Ben Soto, Senior Assistant Technology Specialist here at TCS Access. And I'm here today with my colleague, Harris Rosensweig. Harris, if I can have you briefly introduce yourself. And your
yes. Oh, thanks, Ben. Hi, Harris Rosensweig. I'm the Director of Accessibility for TCS Access. And I can't think of a better person to discuss the multi-dimensional aspects of accessibility as applied to this topic of websites. Someone whose experience goes very deep with this topic. So I'm going to turn it right back to you, Ben.
Oh, thank you, Harris. And so let's see. So talking a little bit about who we are. TCS Access, so we're a company dedicated to providing equal access for all, and we do this through our reasonable accommodation services. So we work with individuals and organizations around the issues of accessibility and usability. And we work with what we call the last mile of accessibility, where you have a real person with a disability, like requiring some form of accommodation, working at an organization doing real tasks. And all of our experience comes from many thousands of hours of working with consumers with disabilities in these situations. Some of the services we provide, individual and group training, needs assessment, product procurement and support. And we'll say based on our experience, we found that accessibility to be two things. So without going into too much detail, just because we realize that there's a mix in the audience, so it'll kind of be more of an overview of accessibility instead of getting too technical, and we also only have 30 minutes. And so we know that as members of the Vision Serve Alliance that you have concerns with this topic and with consumers coming to your websites and internal employees using your own systems, being able to grant equal access to your content. But before jumping into the main presentation, maybe we'll do a quick look at what the definition of accessibility is, and then we'll talk about the goals. Definition of accessibility in this context, providing equivalent access to electronic information, meeting the technical standards of something we'll be talking about later, the WCAG, and then also the usability. In our mind, that's part of accessibility. So we have on the accessibility side, we have this technical standard meeting all this sort of the legal side of things and meeting all this technical criteria. And then on the other side, or different school of thought, we're focusing on that usability, that customer experience, just how well does the site flow, or does this document read, and is it something that a user wants to come back to? And so there's going to be some manual testing to that component. But in our mind, accessibility is both of these things. It's both that technical aspect, meeting all that criteria, and that user experience. And so we'll kind of keep that usability experience in mind as we go through the presentation. And so talking a bit about today's goals, we have the legal side of web accessibility, as well as these web content accessibility guidelines, or WCAG. You might also hear me call it WCAG. And then how these guidelines or how this affects real people using assistive technology, how all that kind of ties together. And then whether how, say, the users, the AT developers, as well as the content designers, whose responsibility is it on a given piece of the puzzle for the whole experience to come together smoothly? And then some of the options that content developers and web designers have to evaluate their websites and documents. So we'll kind of touch on each of those, but again, also 30 minutes. And so looking at the legal side, we have Section 508, and that was a piece of the law created by the government, and it applies to electronic and information technology. And then originally it was a device-based law, so it might look at, oh, what are the criteria for a software or a piece of software, criteria for a piece of hardware or a phone. And over time, things have changed. So you might have an iPhone now, which is both, it has software, it's a piece of hardware, and it's a phone. And so government revisited Section 508, and there was the refresh back in 2018, where instead of looking at devices, now it's based on criteria. And those criteria were basically using the web content accessibility guidelines, WCAG 2.0 AA at the time, as the standard to meet all the technical criteria of what is accessible. And then the ADA has similar language, essentially around communications provided by a corporate or educational entity, but most importantly, both government and corporate are using the WCAG as their standard, these international guidelines that were developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C. And so some of the older guidelines, the 2.0, were before the smartphone. But later on, smartphone kind of changed things, and WCAG 2.1 came out to address some of these mobile specific criteria. Now, earlier I had mentioned, even though this is web, or there's web in the acronym, this is extensible to non-web content. So your Word files, your PDF, these criteria can apply to both. So anytime you see web when you're reading the criteria, just substitute that with document. And earlier I had mentioned level AA. So WCAG 2.1 has about 28 level A standards, sort of the foundational, like, core standards to meet. And then there's the AA standards. There's about 22 of them currently in 2.1. And so in order to be technically accessible, we'll end up meeting these 50 criteria. So AA includes all of the A criteria as well. And so, an example of one mobile level A criteria. So there's this 2.5.4 motion actuation, and just kind of stepping backwards a bit. What that means is, like, let's say I have a phone where, or a website where if you shake it, you shake your phone, that the website goes back a page, or it does a shake to undo. That's like motion actuation. And if in order to meet this criteria, my phone or my website or whatever have you needs to have an option to turn that off, turn off that shake. Um, and then that would meet this level A or this motion actuation related criteria. But there's some additional reading that will be available at the end. But that was just one example of a mobile, where on say the double A criteria, there's an example of contrast. And right now, I have a slide that has high um, dark font on a light background. So I have also a link that previously was a light font on a light background. So visually, that would have been very low contrast and a bit more difficult to see. And one of the criteria, 1.4, for instance, says you need to have a minimum contrast. And there'll be some just in the additional reading tools that you can look at, like a color contrast checker or through WebAIM or um, the color contrast analyzer that you could check and figure out if these colors would work well contrast wise. But I've also been mentioning assistive technology, or AT, throughout just the first half or portion of this presentation. And so what is assistive technology? Well, it's a piece of software or hardware that a user with a disability will use to gain equivalent access to content. So screen readers, kind of imagine turning your entire computer into a phone. I'm sorry, into a phone menu, like just you call into a menu. You can't see the menu. It's just a bunch of audio choices. And you got to listen to which choice you want to choose and press 1 or 5 to access content. Just imagine turning your entire computer into a giant phone menu. Throw away the screen, throw away the mouse, and you just have your speakers and your keyboard. So screen reader, interpreting that content visually into audio. And then you have the screen magnifier, just being able to enlarge content on the screen that maybe doesn't normally let you zoom in on the content, such as like the menus at the top, like the file menu on a Word application. Then you have speech recognition, things that let you dictate to the computer, typing out text and potentially controlling applications or the mouse by voice. And then you have things like captioning, where you could caption videos or say web training, just any type of training course that you might have to take, being able to read what's going on as content is presented. And then you have switch controls in maybe instances of dexterity and mobility, being able to access content and press a button at a given time in order to activate it when the switch reaches that spot. And so AT is only one component of gaining access to content. And there's a lot of dimensions of assistive technology. So a lot of questions kind of come up of even being aware that AT even exists, where to go to get it, where to go to get support or to learn how to use it, and finding others that use it so you can even talk about it, because just that feeling of isolation sometimes. And then also, what is AT even capable of? And then once that's all like, oh, okay, you've addressed all those questions, then it's like, okay, applying AT in the real world or against real examples. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe something is accessible, but it's not usable. So accessibility and usability all just kind of tying together and then just make a real situation. So let's take a screen reader as an example. Visually on the screen, I have on the left a snapshot of a college survey that says apply now, required fields are in blue. And there's this name edit field, email, city, state, zip, and country. And then I have some check boxes, desired majors, And there's like 6 different majors ranging from computer science all the way down to a language like Spanish. And so visually, this form survey or this form field of looks looks like it should be okay. But the screen reader experience, over to the right side, I have a snapshot of NVDA reading through that same form field or that same survey. And what the screenshot is showing is it's saying unlabeled edit has autocomplete, unlabeled edit. And it's showing unlabeled edit for every form field that we see on the left. And then there's some check boxes, all those majors that you could check from computer science to Spanish. It's saying unlabeled checkbox not checked. So the screen reader experience, this whole thing is just unlabeled, unlabeled, unlabeled as I tab through it. And so maybe a web developer might say, well, that's your screen reader, or I put the text there, that's, you need to learn how to like read the text. And maybe a screen reader user is like, well, my AT doesn't work. And the AT user is like, well, no, that's the web. I'm sorry, the AT software might say, oh, nope, that's the web developer that has to go and fix this. And so we get into the question of whose responsibility is it anyway? And on screen, we have a photo of Spider-Man pointing, Spider-Man, the AT user, pointing at Spider-Man, the content creator, and that Spider-Man is pointing back at the AT user. So 2 Spider-Men pointing at each other, kind of blaming each other. And so we get into the responsibilities. So we have the AT user, we have AT software, and we have the content creator. And I'll maybe take this time to talk about an analogy that Harris has heard me say many times. Let's imagine the AT user is, we'll use the analogy of a driver, a car, and roads. The AT user is let's say that they're the driver. The AT software that's getting used is like the vehicle or the car. And the content creator, they're like the folks that create the roads, put up the signs. And so in this example, the driver, they need to learn how to use their vehicle or their car, and they need to make sure that their car is working. And the car itself needs to be able to operate to a given standard and be safe enough to drive on the roads. And then the folks that create the highways, they create the roads to a standard. They put up the ramps. If something says it's going east, it's going to go east, and that there's signs that tell you what street you're on. So if you're trying to get to that McDonald's on E Street and 13th, that the driver can take their working vehicle and go up those ramps and kind of follow the signs to get to their destination. And so in this example, it's not the folks that build the highways, it's not their responsibility to teach a driver how to drive or to make sure that the car is working. And if there's something that's not working well, or some kind of missed turn or stop sign or pothole, that the user might say, or the driver might say, hey, the folks that build this stuff, there's a pothole here that this needs to be fixed. And then it's like, oh, okay, I'll fix that. Or this sign is missing completely, or this sign is broken and I got lost or couldn't get to where I needed to go. So, or the manufacturer has like a recall and then you have to go and address something. So in this example, everyone has a role to play, and it's no one party's responsibility to do all of it. So we were kind of looking more at the content creator, or the folks that build the roads and put up the signs. So a content creator, or like the web designer, they create content in a logical and consistent structure, and they set up that foundation to make sure that users can get to where they need to go. And ultimately following all the technical standards and keeping their knowledge up to date, and having a channel of communication open so that if a user cannot get to where they need to go, or there's just some feedback, that the content creator can take that feedback and address that, and discuss that in order to improve and make changes. And then the role of the user, the AT user needs to know why they're at that site or why they're looking at that document. And then they need to be proficient in their assistive technology and the device they're using to access the content, and also maintaining their tools. So if there's like, we'll say, uh, updates or any known issues that a user kind of tries to keep track of all that, update their tools, make sure things are compatible, any types of patches, sometimes going to the latest, not always the greatest, but it's there. Just making sure you have a working vehicle. And then if things go wrong or don't work as intended, or maybe just sort of a feature wish list, communicating that with either the web designer or the content creator, or also notifying the AT software developer, like, oh, hey, this doesn't work on XYZ. Like, oh, okay, we'll get to that, or if that's a known issue. And then we have the role of the AT developers. So they provide the products that, or the vehicles, in order for a user to get to where they need to go. And it needs to operate in a consistent manner, and it needs to adhere or support to the standards. Instead of like, oh, we creating our own little workaround thing and you have to code it to our workaround. Like, no, just it needs to honor the standards. And then that software needing to be maintained and functioning, and ideally like a responsive support. And so, still leaning on that web design side of things, we have the some options to check accessibility. There are things like built-in browser tools. So Google Chrome's Lighthouse is a built-in tool that we'll briefly look at. And then there are things like automated accessibility auditing tools like WebAIM's Wave for the web. And you have some commercial things such as Common Look for your offline or your documents, like PDF in particular. And then you have some built-in document accessibility checkers, just like Microsoft Office's check accessibility, and Adobe Acrobat's check accessibility, just to kind of give you a general idea of what's going on with your documents. But by no means is it like super comprehensive. And even with all that automated testing, there's still going to be a manual component. So you could manually test with like free screen readers like NVDA. And then there's going to be some ways that you can still manually test even without immediate access to the AT, that we'll kind of talk about. Or you can consult with companies that specialize in web accessibility testing and mediation, so something that TCS Access does. And then also at the end of all this, it's like, well, how do I prove, or how do I like get a summary of what's going on? At the end, you might be looking for an accessibility conformance report, or an ACR, that's like the end product of all the testing, whether something passed or failed or kind of met with some exceptions, or just some things to keep track of. But I did say we're going to look at Google Chrome Lighthouse, and still trying to keep this under 30 minutes. We have just a screenshot on the left of how you might get to Google Chrome's Lighthouse, but on the right side of the slide that we can provide later, there is a text description of like how you might get there by keyboard. So like pressing the Alt F and kind of going down to more tools and developer. So, but not going too much into detail on the Lighthouse, but just showing that it's built into your Google Chrome browsers, and that your Lighthouse tool might give you a choice of, oh, well, what do you want to check for? The accessibility on a desktop device or accessibility on a mobile device? And just kind of a heads up, there really is no substitute for manually testing a mobile site with an actual mobile device with the AT. You can try to emulate it on the PC, but there is no substitute for just manual mobile testing. But this could still give you a general idea of like, oh, this is clearly not working for the mobile. And if this automated tool caught it, then I really need to delve deeper into this. But what are the results of this automated tool? What kind of things can we expect to see? Well, some of these tools might give you a summary of what's going on with your page. And in this case, there's a screenshot of Lighthouse showing 70% or a 70 out of 100 is what this page that I was testing scored. And it's showing me a handful of issues, such as some ARIA labels and attributes and some images that weren't labeled. And so some of these tools will let you know what went wrong, how it failed, and where to go to get additional reading, and gives you a chance to maybe pinpoint like which image or which control or what spot on that website or document went wrong. So Lighthouse isn't for documents, it's for web, but um, the other tools tend to provide something very similar. And so I did mention manual testing. So some examples that I like to use, the screen reader. I like to use a list of elements, just kind of checking the headings, the controls, the links, and the graphics really quick to see if things are unlabeled or if the link is like click here, click here, click here. That's like, okay, well, out of context, I don't know where that's going to take me. So also checking the screen reader or using the screen reader to just check the order of the web page, going from the top and methodically going down and seeing how that reads, if that goes in a logical and consistent order. Or even without the AT, if you have a form field, just using a keyboard and tabbing through that form field. So if you end up going from first name to state back to last name, then even without AT, you just found out this is not in order. Or viewing the source code for like common areas like the page title or is the language set. And then kind of testing through some common usability cases like, oh, logging in or changing a password or making a purchase on a given site. Just what kind of user experience would that be and having someone actually test it. And then so at the end of all this automated and manual testing, we have the accessibility conformance report. Now, you may not always have one of these ACRs, but this is an end product that just to kind of show everyone else that, oh, this is the status or this is the general health of our site or application at the time that it was tested. And just kind of that heads up, even like say Microsoft SharePoint or Apple's website, um, or SharePoint, for instance, if you check their ACR, you'll see that not everything passed at the time that it was looked at. And so there are going to be some notes of like, oh, did not meet or passed, or there's some exceptions. And we'll say that the ACRs are living documents. So things aren't going to be perfect when that ACR comes in. And as long as you keep kind of making strides or progress towards the compliance, it's going to be an ongoing project and a lot of ongoing communication back and forth. So conclusions, there are many dimensions to assistive technology and the guidelines that we use to meet the accessibility on a technical level. But then also looking at some of those responsibilities of, say, the content creator and the AT user, and ultimately trying to create both an accessible and a usable experience. And then we briefly looked at some of the tools and methodologies and the end product for all this accessibility when it's all kind of tied together. And so towards the end of this PowerPoint, we have just some additional resources if you wanted to look at things like the WCAG, being able to read like the 2.1, as well as some tools that you might be able to access and get more info about, such as Google Lighthouse, Wave tool from WebAIM, or some templates for an ACR. And then if you wanted to read more about the legal side of things, there's a slide for Section 508 Final Rule and ADA Title II. And just kind of to recap that TCS Access does provide some workshops, training one-on-one, in group, as well as consulting for accessibility on both desktop and mobile, as well as post-training support. So just checking in. I realized I was talking kind of fast. Are there any questions?
And Ben, if I could jump in, this is Harris. Thank you so much, Ben, for sharing your experience, showing that how many different dimensions there are to accessibility. Just wanted to let everyone know all the handouts for this presentation, the PowerPoint and export to Word of the PowerPoint, along with another a wonderful spreadsheet that Ben created, kind of summarizing the A and AA WCAG standards as they apply to documents and websites. We can make those available if you email us. We do need you to email us though. And then very quickly, lastly, I just wanted to mention one example of how we work with organizations around accessibility when we have like a particular project. I have one in mind where we're working with a company that had an application, a web-based application, and we use what we call an agile process, which is basically another way of saying we do a lot of back and forth, and we do a first pass of accessibility testing where we share those results with you. And then we say, these are the things that we have found over and over and over again that seem to repeat themselves as far as accessibility problems. We have you fix those things, and then you come back to us, and then we retest them. And then we go back and forth and back and forth. And then at the end of all that, as Ben said, we can write up that accessibility conformance report. So I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of how we actually do this work in a very agile way. I saw there was question about the email. I believe that Lee and Vision Server can make sure everyone has our email addresses. We can also maybe put those in the chat.
Yes, I
Ben,
can put those in the chat for you.
thank you very much. Thank you very much. I am going to turn it back to Ben and others who have questions.
Okay. I see a raised hand from Ray, and I see an open mic from Nancy. Ray, I guess we'll take your question.
Everyone's probably muted, so you may have to unmute yourself.
Let's see. And I guess Ray, your mic is muted, but Nancy, I see that your mic is open. Wasn't sure if you had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if there's a discount for your services for nonprofits versus for-profit companies.
On Harris,
Sure,
defer to you.
I'll say. I think what would be best, Nancy, is if you emailed us after the presentation, and then we had a chance to talk about your specific situation.
Thanks.
Sure.
I fixed that, Ray. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Ray, I just saw your chat. Yep, I can take your question, Ray. If it's allowing you to unmute, I'm not sure.
It should be.
Let's see. Yeah. And I'll be here just in case. Oh, I see the chat. Still cannot ask. Okay, it looks like no one can unmute themselves. Oh, not no one, but so while
Yeah,
Ray,
everybody's unmuting themselves, so it looks like it's working. I'm not sure
okay.
what's going on, Ray.
Yeah, I guess once the question is in chat, I'll respond. Uh, and then if anyone had any questions within the time remaining. Um,
This is Harris. There's a lot to digest in here. I'd be curious. Oh, it looks like there's some questions coming in. I'll turn it back to you.
So question from Ray, if I open a PDF on the web, can I use Chrome's Lighthouse function to scan that document? That is a good question. I have not personally tried to do that, but I would be eager to find out and let you know. So another question from Jeff. Has AI advancements made screen readers better at describing images and catching text in images? So far, I would say no to that. So far, that's been the web designer side of things. So at best, just independently, a screen reader user could potentially try to run an image through machine captioning, but that generally doesn't interpret what's going on too well. And the other option is to just try to take a screenshot and run the screen through OCR, and the reading order on that gets really messed up and hasn't been very fun. So I'm sorry, the short answer to that question is no, it has not. Let's see, question from Christina. What are some good first steps, first considerations before starting to build an accessible site? I'd say overall, seeing if there's like an accessible template that explicitly references 508. Some of the templates may not be completely compliant, even if they think they might be. But so kind of looking for some of that if you're using some type of web building software that has templates. And then I'd say kind of looking at some of the examples on the W3C website of good or how to meet. And at first it's going to be pretty overwhelming because I am throwing like thousands of hours of our knowledge and cramming it into like a 30-minute overview. So there's going to be a lot of stuff. Question from Janice, is there a template that you recommend? It really depends on the website builder you're using. So like if you're using, like say WordPress versus some other tool, you may have to check to see what something might be using the refresh as their standard instead of maybe something before the refresh, or at least referencing WCAG or WCAG.
Excuse me, Ben, if I could jump in real quick on that last one.
Yes.
There's a lot of talk lately of shifting left. What that means is moving accessibility more to the very start of your design process. So if you're building a website and you're laying it out and then you're putting your first code together, is to build in that manual testing that Ben mentioned earlier on, like after your first build of your site, to ensure not only are the objects themselves accessible, but is there an efficient way for people to get through that information? Is it usable, as Ben said, those two sides of accessibility, but building that manual testing in from the get-go.
Thank you, Harris. And I see a question from Jason. You talked about contrast on web pages. Can you talk about large print standards in the kind of font and size of font? Do we have standards here? So there are standards for at least like the font size in order to can be considered large font. Typically, like we'll say 14 points or like 18-ish pixels, and it's bold or larger, or even 18 and larger would be considered large font. But there will be a standard in that WCAG to cover the contrast. And then in terms of style, like font style, offhand, I cannot think of one explicitly on the accessibility technical side, but there are going to be some on the usability side where someone says, I can't read the script, or I can't read like this Windings font. So there's going to be some usability feedback you get on that font side. Let's see. And then, yep. So, yep, easier to build from the ground up. Yep. And I guess, yeah, timing wise, question from Ray, do you know of any efforts to get employers on board with making their platforms, get employers on board with making their platforms accessible, software, not web? Explicitly off, and I can't think of anything where it's like, oh, unless the company themselves takes the initiative, like Microsoft is trying to take an initiative for a lot of their products internally. But it's also something where if someone doesn't speak up, there might be departments that might get left behind. So I'd say it's kind of on a company by company basis, but I have seen some push on both Google and Microsoft and trying to, and Apple to try to get their products a bit more accessible, both internally and their systems a bit more accessible. But yeah, would have to hope that the company themselves, other companies would take that initiative as well. And I realize there's a lot of other stuff going on, but yeah. But yeah, any other questions? Any other thoughts? Thank you all. Thank you all for having us today.
Yeah, this is Harris. We do have some extra time, assuming people have till 1. Happy to answer more questions about how we do what we do on the accessibility side, or if you wanted to dive in any more to any of these topics that have been covered.
I want to thank you both. We'll leave it open for discussion. Maybe you can stop sharing your screen so we can see more of the participants. That's good. And
Wow.
I did want to just mention that there, of course, is legislation afoot regarding website accessibility, and some of the ones that aren't quite to bill status also address software accessibility. So I think the next few years we could see some, fingers crossed, big changes coming. ACB, NFB, and AFB have been collaborating on these efforts for some time, and VisionServe Alliance is following and supporting that through our National Policy Collaborative. All of those organizations, all the national organizations are members of that. And if you want any additional information on any of that, please let us know. Shoot me or Libby Murphy an email and we'll get you more info. There is going to be plenty of opportunity for all of us who care about this to sign on and talk to our elected officials about this. This is going to be a big push in 2023. Thank you, Ray. Oh, come on. I know somebody else has some questions. Don't be shy.
It's Jason Eckert. I am muted, so I'll ask a question.
Great.
A little bit different, just a little bit different focus. I've seen a lot of interaction in the community about actually training folks with vision impairment for employment as accessibility testers. I've seen some programs pop up that this is a burgeoning field. So I guess my question to you is, we all know on this call that we experience a tremendous amount of shortage of professionals in the vision rehabilitation field, or in folks that help increase access as broadly as that word can be used for folks who have vision loss. From your perspective, a company that does this, is there a shortage in professionals that can provide this type of testing and the type of services that you provide?
So I would say observation-wise, there has been a shortage. Let's say in a agency or whatchamacallit, it might have like hundreds to thousands of individuals. There might only be like 1 to 4 people testing for everything. And a lot of last minute changes that just make testing in a reasonable turnaround time just not probable. So there is a shortage when I consider it from that angle. And then a little bit separate from the question, but there's also the component of some of the testing tools or the remediation tools. The remediation tools themselves are not fully accessible, which kind of just throws this curveball of, okay, well, what do we do? So there are going to be a mix of like a lot of testing that can be done, and then there's going to be components that unfortunately at this time do not work with all AT. Mostly the visual driven content or things that want you to absolutely use the mouse to correct it. Those are still inaccessible, even though they create a accessible end product, which is a separate topic. But yeah.
Can I ask a quick follow-up, which would simply be, is there a standard for folks who do this work? People who put themselves out there as a usability, accessibility tester? Is there a standard, a certification, an organization that folks who can do this work participate in, gain a credential in, what have you?
Harris, I defer to you on that one. If you might know anything specifically.
Yes, this is Harris again. Great question. So I've been in the field over 30 years, and there is a professionalization going on probably in the last five or more years. So there's 2 that I have in mind. One is there's the trusted tester from DHS. That was like the only one for a while. And now the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, IAAP, they have their own certification, which is becoming very much the standard internationally. So they're both good. And so I would say if you're looking to get into the field, before it used to be good enough to hang out your shingle and say, I'm an AT user and I'm willing to test your website. But now I think people are more interested in you also having that certification or one of those to really enhance that. But it's still a little bit of the Wild West. Yeah.
That's a great question. Thank you, Jason. And not to take anything away from TCS because they're a great organization, but I will mention that there are a number of our member organizations who are also in this business line, and they might do slightly different things. So it's a growing body, but there is more work than anybody can handle. And that's great because it shows that people are finally companies, businesses are starting to realize that this is important for their business to do this. What other questions do you have? Amy, I saw in the chat they were asking about the handouts, and Harris is happy to send those to you. You need to email him directly, and his email address has been listed a couple of times in the chat, but we can repeat that if you'd like us to.
And I see Amy's question, will the resources websites assist in checking for accessibility? And we plan on putting our application for services on the website, and we need to check it for accessibility. So the short answer is yes. And I guess the analogy I'm about to present is it's kind of like the IRS, where all the info is there, to be digested, but sometimes you might still go to H&R Block to like, oh, I just need someone to kind of internalize all that info. So the information will be there in order to get up and running. But potentially we can all just kind of work together to kind of digest and interpret that info and get you up and running.
Yeah, it helps to have an expert. I can attest to that. Ellie has her hand raised. Go ahead, Ellie.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to respond to the question about advocacy and, creating change around this. And I mean, we've all heard about different companies being sued because aspects of their sales mechanisms didn't satisfy accessibility. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting and effective that I saw that the Miami Lighthouse did, they produced a report on the accessibility of the websites of candidates running for office. And it was picked up by the New York Times.
Cool.
And some of the candidates responded immediately, some responded ineffectively, and some didn't respond at all. But I think, any individual can create that kind of awareness. And awareness was one of the key elements that you were talking about today,
Yep.
Ben. So people who are in a position where they're required to respond need to have that awareness so that they can be supportive when we ask them to make new legislation or to add to the standards that exist. And so it doesn't take very long if you know how to do an accessibility feature, or even if you just go to the website and you can't access it, that would be enough. It'd be kind of interesting for local groups of consumers, or just whatever kind of combination of groups you might have to every now and then pick on a few people or pick them.
Yes.
That's a great strategy. Easy peasy. Let's analyze the websites of all our elected, or at least our federal officials.
It's Jason again. I will simply say there are lots of articles if you do a little Google search on that. That would show up. Virginia Jacko has picked on many of our elected officials on this exact topic.
That's
And
great.
there are lots of articles there. She talks about it frequently, and it is a good advocacy technique. And in my opinion, it's been effective.
Let's see. And another question from Ray. Have you partnered with Access Academy for any projects? If more visually impaired individuals are aware of that coding or web content creation is accessible, perhaps they will pursue careers in this field. Harris, any knowledge on this?
No, but I have seen a great increase in programs that resemble this. And it's just what an interesting time to be in, where people are realizing, yes, maybe I could be an accessibility tester, or yes, maybe I could even be a programmer. I've seen there's other programs teaching people about how to become Salesforce certified, the Salesforce database. So this is an interesting time where there are lots more opportunities where persons who are assistive technology users are maybe going into more traditional fields as well.
Any other questions? Sorry, Harris, I know I'm like throwing all the questions at you now.
No worries. I love talking about this trends in accessibility, how this works.
All right. Well, I think we are probably good, and we can give people back 5 minutes of their lives. So we really appreciate it, Harris and Ben. Great webinar. We will be sharing the recording. And again, if you want any of the specific resources that they talked about, email them directly, and they'll be happy to talk with you. And just want to extend our best wishes to everyone for a safe and happy holiday.
Thank you all.
Take
Thanks
care.
for having
Thank
us.
you.